So, what's the saying? You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain, right?
What's up, everybody? So, I got a chance to see Sean Combs' The Reckoning, as it says, produced by 50 Cent. And I think people can, I'm pretty sure people have made entire video series about the issues between 50 Cent and Diddy. But I do have to say, if there's one thing that you do have to admit if you've seen this documentary, is that 50 Cent's fingerprints are nowhere near this. This is a legit documentary telling the story of the rise and fall of one of the great figures in pop culture history. Um, the director, Alexandra Stapleton, kudos. She did an absolutely amazing job putting all of this together. And I think two main elements I think were really compelling for me. I've seen a couple of the documentaries that have come out. There was one particularly, I think, that came out uh, last year, on HBO Max. That was very well done. Some of the same people that showed up in that character showed up in this one as well. But I think the way it all is put together, the way Alexandria Stapleton put it all together, I think was just, it's gripping, and then you see how every single aspect that she covers in Diddy's life bleeds into the next one until, the fourth episode, the fourth and final episode, which is the culmination of everything. And really, you kind of see, as my intro says, he really was a hero. Like, I am 44 years old. I'm going to turn 45 this year. And I was part of that generation that saw P. Diddy as this larger than life aspirational figure of just hard work, grit, determination. Nobody really thought that he was an incredibly talented MC. He wasn't a great rapper, he wasn't a great lyricist, but his persona, his ability to just command the stage and to have this kind of presence wherever he was something that we kind of all kind of wished we could have at least just a little bit of. But when you see, I think, Kirk Burrows, who was with Diddy at the foundation of Bad Boy Entertainment, when you have Capricorn Clark, who was his assistant, that did what she could. At least it really felt, at least the narrative that she spins, her perspective on all the events that happened with Diddy, really makes it seem like she did what she could in the limited position that she was in. She was just an assistant, so there's very little that she can say that will really sway Diddy in any way. But Kirk Burrows' story, I think, was probably the linchpin of this all. It's the one character in all of this that really, I think, tied everything together in a way, because since he was there at the very, very beginning, you see how there are like little instances that portended what would happen later on in the future. It's particularly with the way he describes how did he basically took away his percentage of the company. He had 25% of Bad Boy, and then did he basically, according to him, forced him, it very much intimidated him, as he says, like, was telling him that he needed to sign over his 25%. He was going to give it back, but he needed it for some financial issue. And the way that he was explaining that to him was basically standing behind him holding a baseball bat over his shoulder. If that's not intimidation, I don't know what is. And then he did it, never got what he wanted after. But I think what makes his story even more credible, and I wish that the producers of this documentary, not necessarily 50 Cent, um, but I wish they would release, the some of the documents that they showed flashes of throughout the documentary when Kirk Burrows was talking, because he says himself that, like, he wrote down everything, like what had to be done, how much it was going to cost, what the return was supposed to be. Like, he had it all, jotted down. And it would be nice to see, especially for the internet sleuths out there, have it all online, and then you can dig through it yourself and kind of see how all of this was being put together. And so I think hearing his story, hearing how he said he was, and he admitted this in the final episode of how he was SA'd by Diddy, which is, not something that anybody just says lightly. He could have said it at the very beginning, but he painted the picture so vividly. And then when he finally admits, what he alleges Diddy did to him, it comes off as credible. And then with Capricorn Clark, she says something really, really interesting. She says, because the assistant that worked for Diddy afterwards, I think his chief of staff, they called her KK. I forget what her actual name was, but Capricorn Clark says that, that this woman came in later, and Capricorn Clark says something to the effect of, it's the story of the good wolf and the bad wolf. Which one do you get? The one you feed the most. And so she did what she could in her time to feed the good wolf, the good side of Diddy. And most other people were just basically enablers that, enabled his bad behavior that just escalated and became worse and worse. And so those two figures, I think, lent the most credibility in my eyes, as just a humble viewer. I didn't think they in the public made a lot about the whole idea of the two jurors of the Diddy trial that were interviewed and spoke in the documentary, but I didn't necessarily find their take on it any more compelling than the other people that spoke. So when Lil Rod, the producer of one of Diddy's albums that also has allegations of himself of his own about Diddy, and also a lawsuit that he brought forth after Cassie did. Um, I think his story was more compelling than what the jurors thought, because it's just a matter of legalities, you know what I mean? So when you're talking about legal issues, it gets very, very boring and very technical and very specific. And so there's nothing to really latch on to that you think is, like the smoking gun or what have you. But when you hear people that were there directly, firsthand people, it starts to really kind of, even though there are different moments and different versions of him, you kind of see how it all fits together, like a just crazy puzzle. Um, in the end, it's kind of a sad story because he was such a larger than life figure. And I don't mean to speak of him, like he's passed away or anything like that, but I do believe that this version of Diddy is gone and will never be the same again. He's only got, I think, 4 years in prison, and it might seem like it's gonna, you know, go like that. And next thing you know, he's gonna be out. And I feel like he's gonna do his best to recapture, you know, the status that he had as Diddy. But I think it's gone, and it's never gonna come back. And he's gonna try hard. I can see that in him. But yeah, he lived long enough to see himself become the villain. Anyways, what about you guys? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Smash that like button, give me a follow, and I'll see you guys next time.